Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Yellow Rope on the Beach webinar, co-hosted by Oregon and Washington Sea Grant. My name is Kate Goodwin, and I'm a marine educator with Oregon Sea Grant, based at Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center in Newport. My co-facilitator is Terry King, aquaculture and marine water quality specialist with Washington Sea Grant, and she is based in Shelton, Washington. This webinar is intended to get students like yourself interested in marine science, engineering, and stewardship, as well as connected with professionals working in ocean science fields. It's also part of an education project focused on marine debris solutions. You may have had the experience of finding a piece of marine debris on the beach and thinking to yourself, what is this? How did it get here? What was it originally used for? How could its escape into the marine environment be prevented? In order to figure out how to prevent an item from becoming marine debris, we need to learn its story. Our presenters today will help us uncover the story of yellow rope fragments and share some of the solutions that industry has been working on to prevent this material from ending up on beaches. Now, I must say I'm very excited about our three speakers today. They are all connected to the oyster industry in the Pacific Northwest, and they will help us understand the story of our focus item for today, these short yellow rope fragments. Our first presenter is David Bagley. David Bagley is the director of the Willapa Grace Harbor Oyster Growers Association. The association represents 19 shellfish farms and growers along the southwestern coast of Washington. And we will also be hearing, following his presentation, from Miranda Reese and Margaret Palaro. But David is going to start us off. David, you may go ahead and start your video, and our PowerPoint can now be started, and begin your presentation.
Okay, that looks good on my end. I'm ready to get started. Let's go to the next slide, please, Terry. So before we get started on talking about yellow rope, I wanted to share some of the most common growing methods that are utilized by farmers on the Washington coast here. There's lots of ways to grow oysters, but the top four most common ways that I'm going to briefly discuss today are bottom culture, flip bags, rack and bag, and long lines. Next slide, Terry. So bottom culture oysters that you see in the picture here it's probably the oldest growing method and a way to grow oysters. In the Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor area, about 90% of the oysters are grown with bottom culture methods. This is a method where a parent shell has several oyster spats set on it and creating a cluster. Okay, next slide, Terry. So bottom culture oysters are either harvested by hand or by boat, depending on high tide or low tide and kind of the bed type. On the picture on the left there, you can see crews hand picking oysters into bushel baskets and then putting them into much larger baskets that have a float attached to them, and those will be picked up by the barge at high tide and then emptied onto the deck. On the right there, you can see a dredge with a dredge basket, and that is skimmed along the surface, and that basket there collects the oyster clusters from the tidelands, and then they're brought onto the boat, and there's a little purse on the bottom of there that kind of unzip it and dump them on the deck. Next slide, thank you. So here, after these oysters have been harvested, they were growing out there on the tidelands for 3 to 5 years. They're delivered to a processing plant, and in this case, the bottom culture oysters are shucked by hand. You can see on the left there, all individually, all done by hand. And then after they're washed and cleaned, they're put in on the right picture there. You can see where they're put into jars. And this is what's called a shucked meat product. And this is primarily towards restaurants and wholesale and grocery stores. Next slide. Okay, the flip bags are a kind of a new emerging growing method. And this is where oysters are grown off the bottom. And these are singles or a raw bar oyster. And if you look at the picture on the right there, it creates a single oyster with a deep cup that's something that you would use as an oyster shooter or a raw bar. It has a more pretty shell to it and kind of more plattable. And this method is actually becoming much more common and is on the increase. Thank you. So rack and bag oysters is kind of on the decline, but still utilized a little bit. And this is where these plastic bags have single oysters on them, and they're grown up on rebar racks on the tidelands there. And then the farmers are going to come in at low tide on a two-year cycle to harvest them by hand. And this is, again, a singles type oyster. So this kind of gets us to where we're talking about the long lines today, and kind of the whole point of this meeting. So I think the big take homes on long lines is that these oysters are grown on areas that are not really suitable for bottom culture. They have PVC poles spaced 6 to 8 feet apart, or 4, depending on how big the oysters are. On these poles are clusters of oysters woven in every 6 inches apart. And from there, this creates this cluster oyster that will eventually be harvested for a shucked meat. And I think the important take home is this is kind of where we're starting to see where the marine debris issue comes in onto play for the talk today. Next slide, Terry. So I saw a video that was put together by Keith Cox of Stony Point Pictures, and he put together a really good 7-episode documentary called Willapa Bay Oysters. And I was looking at that video and talking to Terry about it. And we kind of thought that was really the best way to discuss and kind of look at and share how oysters are grown using long lines. So I'm now going to share my screen with you guys and play a video, and then you guys will get to see kind of firsthand how longline oysters are utilized or cultivated. So I'll see if I can get that going here, Terry. I'm going to take it away from you. Okay, here we'll give it a go.
Long lines, you have just one group every foot or so, so not as much competition for food.
The deceiving thing with long lines is they're fairly simple to put out and they're fairly simple to take care of, and then all of a sudden they're really labor intensive to harvest. Boat that we harvest with, it's got a reel on the front which is hydraulically powered, and so typically we'll tie a buoy with a line on it so we know where it is, grab the buoy, bring it up over the reel, and that line just starts to come up. Cut it up into pieces and load it into the back of the boat.
All right, thank you, Terry, for the screen share. Can we go to the next slide there? I would encourage everybody to definitely, if they have some time, to go check out that the Keith Cox Willapa Bay Oysters. There's a huge amount of information there on all the different farms and methods, and is really Willapa Bay focused. So now you guys kind of saw the video there on how long lines are used and how they are harvested. And so after the public contacted Margaret and I about this issue, at that point we kind of looked and did a review on how long lines are utilized, and kind of looking at how are these entering the environment and what are the next steps. So we did a kind of review of how they were farmed, what the practices were, talked to growers, and got more information. And what we identified at that time was 3 main opportunities for the yellow longline fragments to enter the environment. So the first one you saw there in the video is at the time of harvest. When they're harvesting those long lines, they're cutting them up into little pieces. The second opportunity there is you see in that picture on the right-hand side there. So when these longline oysters are brought back to the processing plant and they are shucked, all that yellow line and shell is combined together, and that shell is washed and reused. So Terry's sitting there with the cursor and showing that yellow line. These shells are bagged for the next crop, which are going to be used to have as the parent oyster for having the spat set on it. And that's the second opportunity for yellow lines to enter the environment. When these shells are planted in the tidelands, that yellow rope can get back into the environment. The third opportunity there is you see a big, huge pile of shell. Another way that a few farmers rely on natural sets. This is where they have areas or tidelands that have oysters living on them that spawn and recruit naturally. What they'll do is they'll take this clean shell and they'll put it on the deck of one of these big barges you saw earlier and use a fire hose to spread it real evenly over the tidelands. And if any of that yellow line gets into that shell pile, that's the third opportunity for it to enter the environment. And so these are kind of like the focus points where we work together to try to address this issue. So that's all I have to share on the kind of the yellow rope, on how it's used and how it's in the environment. Next up is Miranda from Pacific Seafood.
Great. Thank you, David. That was great. And I really like that video because it really shows us how the material is used. That's really helpful. Not many of us get out there to see that. So our second presenter today is Miranda Reese, who Miranda is the Director of Regulatory Affairs in the Aquaculture Division at Pacific Seafood, headquarters in Clackamas, Oregon. Pacific Seafood's a company that manages all parts of the seafood supply chain, harvesting, fishing, processing, distribution, in order to provide customers with fresh, sustainable, high-quality products. So Miranda, you may go ahead and start your video and begin your presentation.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here this afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. Like Kate and David said, my name is Miranda Reese, and I am a fourth-generation shellfish woman. This is an industry that I have grown up in, and one that many of my fellow colleagues that are in the shellfish industry have also grown up in. And most importantly, I think it's important to realize that oyster farmers rely on the environment, and we rely on healthy, clean water to grow our oysters and clams and geoduck in a sustainable way, where we can use Mother Nature and what she offers us in the oyster industry, but also protecting it for generations to come. So when this yellow rope issue became very apparent, thanks to other members that were within our community, we all came together and said, what can we do to address this issue? Realizing that marine debris as a whole is something that this entire planet is focused on addressing, and we want to make sure that we could do our part. And so at my operation, we implemented a program with some interns from surrounding colleges, some at OSU, UW, and George Fox. And they created what we have now called the Cluster Buster, which we will see here shortly. Additionally, we have also done our part by getting out there on the beach and painstakingly picking up yellow pieces of rope, along with bottle caps and glass and other common marine debris items, but really focused on removing that yellow rope. And so we're going to see the Cluster Buster in action. I have a short video for you to see, and then we're going to also talk about different ways that you and your families and your colleagues and friends can get out there and also be a part of the plan to get all marine debris off of our beaches. Next slide, please, Terry. So here's a video that's going to see, you're going to see the Cluster Buster in action. This is before it was all framed up and in place. But as you can see, this equipment will take those clusters of shell that David showed us that have those pieces of yellow rope intertwined and go through this piece of equipment, breaking the shell apart, but not destroying it because we want to be able to recycle it, but removing that piece of yellow rope from that cluster so that it can be separated and properly disposed of. So all you can see is left is a few shells, but mostly just yellow rope. Next slide. Thank you. So here is that cluster buster once it's got all of its framing and safety components put in place. And this is placed at the end of our conveyor in our South Bend processing plant. So as oysters are being shucked that were previously long lines, they come out of the plant on a conveyor. They go through this cluster buster where they are separated. And what comes out is yellow rope that is picked by hand from a couple of folks that stand back there all day long and painstakingly pull yellow rope. Thankfully, it's high visible. And the oyster shells are then carried on back to those big, large shell piles where they are clean and ready for proper redistribution out into the estuary. Next slide. So this is where we start talking about what we have done and also what you can do. So as you can see in that center picture, you have what I call a very nasty picture of likely probably close to 1,000 pieces of yellow rope you can see in that pile. And those are from a collection of likely a couple of hours walking along a beach, maybe with a couple of folks picking up yellow rope. Yellow rope is in Washington, Oregon, California beaches. Often it is probably overlooked by folks, but when you start looking for it, unfortunately, it's not hard to see. And so we have what we call legacy rope out in the environment. And so one of our goals is to go through Washington, Oregon, California beaches until we no longer are finding this yellow rope. However, we also have to come up with a solution. So while we recognize that there is a lot of rope that is already out there that we will take responsibility for and put in the efforts to make sure is cleaned up, we knew that the cluster buster was a way to stop this cycle. However, we also know that we are not able to hit every single beach. We have farming work to do. We have, a long, probably 2,000 miles worth of coastline that needs to be walked. And so we are very hopeful that with folks like you that are on this call today, folks that are in our communities, and folks that are very serious about cleaning up the beaches, that soon, within, 5 years is one of my personal goals, yellow rope will be a thing of the past on our Washington beaches. And I will leave it there and turn it over to Margaret to talk about what the industry is doing as a whole.
Great. Thank you so much, Miranda. If you have questions for Miranda or David, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A at any time, and we'll have time at the end of the session, and we'll talk to all our panelists at the same time and ask your questions. So great. We're going to move on to our next presenter, who is Margaret Pallaro. She is the Executive Director of the Pacific Coast Shellfish Growers Association. PCSGA represents over 100 shellfish companies who sustainably produce mussels, oysters, clams, and geoduck in the states of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii. You can now share your video, Margaret, and take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you again for taking time to learn more about this issue. And I think David and Miranda did an excellent job kind of explaining the piece of it and where it's coming from. One of the things I want to add is that shellfish growing has been a vital part of the communities along the West Coast for nearly a century. It really started in Washington State. Shellfish back in the 1800s were brought to California to be consumed as people started to come west. And then the industry sort of blossomed from there. The industry has evolved quite a bit in the last 100 years. And what we're seeing here with yellow rope and our attention to dealing with this is part of that evolution. So the communication shellfish growers have with their community members is essential because we are growing a healthy product for people to enjoy, and we're making that something that is the priority. But if there are ways that we can do things better, and if there's input from the community to suggest those those options, that's certainly what we want to pay attention to and incorporate into our growing. So like I said, bringing this issue to our attention was a really great thing, and it's part of our evolution as the industry continues to grow. Most of the shellfish companies that are on the West Coast are actually quite small, employing about 10 people or less. We refer to these as sort of the ma and pops. Many of our shellfish companies are multi-generational, so they represent the third or fourth generation shellfish farmer. So again, showing that commitment to the industry. We do have a couple of very large companies, but you know, we all work together, and that diversity of small and large companies is really important. So when this issue came to us, we realized that we needed to do some education for our members and for shellfish growers to understand this. And so we started with understanding the issue, as Miranda and David laid out for you, and sponsoring beach cleanups and encouraging growers to think about, are there things that you can do? Or is there any way to reduce this? And Pacific Seafood, under Miranda's actual leadership, kind of said, I think we can do something. And that's a really exciting thing for us. And we're very thankful as an industry that leadership came through to do that. But we also realized that there was a general awareness that we needed to bring to all shellfish growers. And what you see here on the screen is part of that effort. And so you can actually go ahead and advance the screen. So this is really communicating to our growers that the debris needs to get under control. And we really would like to try to get zero debris out there, right? And so the first sticker showed it in a shell pile, which you've seen from the previous presentations. And here it is out on the water. You know, we have a boat that works the farm, and when they see yellow rope, they should be picking it up. And then the next slide. And we've compiled all of these, what you call best practices, or BMPs, those are best management practices, into a poster that is also available for shellfish companies who practice a long line culture or who somehow interface with it. They might be actually farming it, or they might be receiving packs of seed or bags of seed that have the shell in it from the shell pile, and it also contains the yellow rope. So we knew that we had to really target the 3 spots at which we could make a difference in pulling the yellow rope out of the system. So the first one is really at the processing facility. When shellfish is being processed, let's capture that. So we have a series of best practices there, essentially being told to, when you see yellow rope, get it out, pull it out. Don't let it continue on to the shell storage pile, because that would be the next step. And let's remove it from the system. Then we have best practices on the farm. Once we are distributing the shell, as David explained along the way, let's make sure we are paying attention to when there is yellow rope fragments. So as it comes from the processing facility to the farm, let's watch for it. If we see something that's contaminated, let's set it aside, let's remove it. And that does require a lot of manpower, of course, but it's a commitment that we've made to move that. And let's try our best to make sure we avoid using shell that is contaminated and don't reuse it. And that means not only on the farm, but sometimes communities ask for shell to use for driveways or other landscaping. And we need to be clear that even when we're giving shell in that sense, or restoration efforts, that also be cleaned. And then the third place is there in the storage piles themselves, and taking time to assign crews and making that commitment to assign crews to go through and pull the shell out and sign the piles. And I'll show you an example of the sign that I mean for that. But make sure it's clear that if shell piles have not been cleaned out, that they should be designated as such, so that they are not accidentally or purposefully used. So these posters are in a sort of a weather-proof, I guess I would say, weather-resistant format, so that they can be posted at different parts throughout the process of farming and processing shellfish. And the two previous slides, those are stickers that can be adhered again to different spots along the way. Terry, go ahead and move the next slide. And we also have signs that send the message, but also expand it. As Miranda talked about, you know, it is yellow rope, but there's also a whole heck of a lot of other debris, bottles, nets, pieces of household goods that are out there. And we all need to do that. So I think the movement is to sort of expand beyond just yellow rope and deal with the issue of marine debris across the board. So this is a sign that we can put up in areas where the public has access to beaches or boat ramps or others, to let them be aware that everyone really plays a role in addressing marine debris. We'd like people to help sort of pick up the slack, if you will, to do that. PCSGA also maintains a marine debris hotline, and we were lucky enough to get that funky number there, the 260 beaches, and that can be called at any time. If you find an area that has more marine debris than you can manage and you need some help, please call that number. And within, you know, a few days or so, we will try to get crews, shellfish growers, basically out to those areas to investigate it and work with local agencies to help remedy that problem. So this is really a commitment, not just for yellow rope, but for all marine debris that we see. Again, shellfish growers are producing a food product, and the cleaner the water is, the better that product. And I mean, anything we can do to reduce that, it would be the best. I think there might be one more slide to show an example of how we would be asking folks, and we did make these available in signs for people to put on their shell piles, that it just basically is, it couldn't be any more obvious. Don't use this pile of shell, it contains debris, period. And hopefully this will be put into good practice. I don't think I have any more slides. So thank you again for being interested in this. And I think now we're open to questions.
So here's a good question. What is currently done with the yellow rope fragments once they are removed from the shell? So what is the recycling process? And this is open to all three of our panelists.
I'm happy to take a first stab on it. I'm sure Margaret will have more to add. So currently the yellow rope, for the most part, is taken to the dump. While that is not ideal, we are conscious of the impacts it would have to actually make it to a recycler in an efficient and economic and environmentally friendly way. We have had some conversations with different folks at different NGO groups with some intentions and goals of getting this rope to recyclers. And we hope to be able to find one that meets some of those criteria very soon. But for now, we are taking it to the dump, which is obviously not the most ideal situation.
Great. Anybody else want to comment? All right. So
Actually,
our next, go ahead. Go ahead, Margaret.
I think that there's a possibility, there's an opportunity that we've explored a little bit outside of Westport, Washington. And David, I think, knows more about this, where there's a cogeneration facility that is taking some of the yellow rope and using that to sort of stoke the fire, if you will, or some other process that's happening. But as Miranda indicated, you know, it's one of those pieces where it's hard to justify moving large quantities of yellow rope to find a proper recycler with, adding more carbon footprint if to that. So David, did you have more on the cogen?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked on a couple of recycling opportunities. We have some stuff in the works. We did have done some recycling in the past with other types of plastic materials. We have not specifically done something with the yellow rope fragments. It's not a huge volume overall that's generated, but we are working on new ways to recycle plastics all the time.
Great, thanks. And David, why not stay on? The next question is, why is yellow rope so common with growing oysters? Are there plans to replace it with something less harmful to the environment?
I can take that a little bit. So the longline oysters on the coast in general is kind of on the decline. There's not nearly as many acres as there has been in the past. It's being less commonly utilized. And research has been done to look at alternate types of line. And I've actually had manufacturers call me and ask about products they have, including soy-based plastics and manila jute and stuff like that. At this point, they haven't really developed a product that lasts for the whole growing period that is still as durable. That most of the different other products identified haven't lasted.
Great, thank you so much for that. Anybody else want to contribute to that answer?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think David was spot on. We've done, and I think there's still work continuing. I know within our operation there are some research and development taking place. We always are looking for something that is, will hold up in the marine environment. Unfortunately, the marine environment is very harsh on material, regardless whether it's metal or plastic. And so there's constant work that's being done to find something as an alternative that is comparable to yellow rope, keeping in mind that these oysters get wet and heavy. And so finding something that will sustain and make it through that 3+ year life cycle has been a challenge to date, but something that we're still aspirational.
And not only are they wet and heavy, they also are very sharp, those edges.
Yes, yes.
So one of a great question came in is, how long has yellow rope been in use? Anybody have an idea of when that started to be a practice with the long lines?
I don't actually know when it was really started being heavily used, but I think long lines have been around since the late 70s, kind of when they, yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah, mid to late 70s.
I know we use them in research also for different oyster sets that we're trying out. We'll use those long line facilities because it's easy to keep the crops separated. So that means from the 70s, there could be quite a bit of a legacy rope issue in different areas. So coming aboard that we see.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of legacy rope, and it's while it all derives from shellfish culture at one time or another, it's not always placed out there by shellfish farmers. But again, going back to what Margaret spoke to earlier, it's a marine debris problem that we are committed to addressing. But in the past, we've had different agencies use it for road maintenance and use it for riprap on wash-away areas, things like that. And so as those areas continue to erode, now we're seeing that yellow rope being exposed. And so it's coming from multiple different places and different locations. Thankfully, we have great community folks that are always pointing it out and reminding us or telling us when they find an area that is being exposed to more yellow rope fragments. And so we're able to get out there and address it when it does show up. But like I said, it's going to be with us even after we address the new stuff. The legacy rope is something that we will continue to address.
Another great question is, does the location of the harvest of the oysters, be it over water or over land, impact how easily the yellow rope can be collected and disposed of? So is it easier to take care of it over water, easier to take care of it over land? Does it matter? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it's, go ahead, David.
I know that the longline oysters are harvested by people at high tide with the boats with the drum on the front of it, but they're also harvested at low tide And that's kind of one of the first point issues right there. And so I don't know if it really makes a difference on the actual harvest timing necessarily.
Yeah, I think I would agree with David. It's while the rope is, mostly in the water environment, when it is harvested, I think that's our opportunity to begin the conscious effort of not letting it get back out there. So we're moving it with the oysters and then doing our part once it hits the land to make sure that it doesn't get back to the water unintentionally.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then again, we saw the video that Keith shot that shows the lines coming up over the barrel, and then it's cut into lengths, and that's for crew safety or for the weight of the product on the line, and also just for crew entanglement if the entire line came up. And that's why it comes into those segments, right?
Yeah, that's right. So when it gets cut, it is then being put onto the boat, and then it's going into a processing facility. And so to get it into the processing facility where it's going to be handled by human beings, it needs to be in a quantity that is manageable to be handled. And keeping in mind that those folks often in one hand have a knife, and in the other hand they are grabbing for an oyster at a very, very quick speed. So making sure that it's a reasonable pull is very important.
Great. One of the questions is, do all of the people or all of the farmers that are using long lines have something similar to a cluster buster that removes the shell from the rope, that shell that's grown over the rope, and so it's not easy to part?
As of now, Pacific Seafood is the only one that has a cluster buster. We, like I said in my presentation, had some engineering students that created this amazing piece of equipment. However, I'm very excited to say that we just received a conservation district grant that will allow us to build what we're referring to as a mobile cluster buster. And that will be able to take to these shell piles that are marked currently with those fabulous posters that say that they have debris in them now. We'll now be able to go through that mobile cluster buster and get removed from shell and rope, and we will have now clean piles that we can safely and confidently put back into the water. So that's very exciting. We just received that grant last week and are excited to start that build here this summer. And that will be used across the industry for folks that either have yellow rope in their shell piles or use yellow rope as part of their cultivation methods. And so I'm very, very excited to see this progress that's been made just in the last 15 months. So we have our cluster buster on our processing plant, and now we will have one that the rest of the industry will be able to utilize.
So, and this was again with Pacific Conservation District?
Correct.
Great. I want to make sure we get that right. Conservation
Absolutely.
Very important for all of shellfish and all of our lands, for all farmers. And
yes, so Mike Norden led that charge. He came to us and said, here you have a great opportunity. How can we utilize this in a meaningful way? And so we took advantage of it and are very excited to be able to put that into use.
Great. That's awesome. So David and Miranda, especially, and Margaret, if you want. So if a person didn't have a cluster buster, how did they get the rope from the oyster shell? If they had seen it as an issue, what was their thing? A Baltine hammer, or cursing at it and hoping it'd magically come apart, or driving over it with a truck? I don't know. How did folks deal with it before we had this beautiful cluster buster?
Yeah, actually, some of the smaller farms are using carpenters hatchets, and they go through on the stand on the table, and that's how they break them up. After they're shucked, if there's still a cluster of shell that's been shucked with rope in it, there is people that are breaking them up at the farms. Some guys do drive over them in their driveway and crush them, and then have the shell removed and pick up the rope later on. Every little farm is different. Depends on the size and what they have available to them.
Very, very labor-intensive process, regardless of how you go about doing it. And I think hence why we had maybe some lack of ability to actually control what was happening, because it was, just this inundation of rope that seemed, like an insurmountable task to pull every piece out. And I believe I don't think it was ever done with any kind of intention, but there was some thought there that that rope would stay on that shell that it was interwoven with. And we now know that that's certainly not the case.
Mhm. And I think what Miranda just said is so important. The rope is entwined with the shell. The shell is grown around it. So it's not like it'll slip out or float out or anything like that. It is an integral part of that shell matrix now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was one thing I learned through this process, is that the 3-ply rope is in particular so that if you untwist it, those 3 strands come apart, and that's how you can get the mother oyster shell inside. And so that's why it's characteristically three strands. In our area in Oregon, I know we see a lot of the single strands, like those 3 strands have separated, so we get 1 strand at a time. And I don't know if you have any insight on if it just means it's been in the environment that much longer, or if that's related to a different particular type of use, or just that's the way it is when we
I think what we've learned, Kate, is that rope can come apart, and often does come apart. So that 3 strand then is separated into 1 strand.
Mhm.
And that's where you get that 1 strand. Occasionally you'll still find a piece of rope that is attached to a shell. But with wave action and the power of the ocean, we know now, unfortunately, lessons learned that rope does get away from that shell.
And as a follow-up, because the yellow rope is buoyant, meaning it floats, is there any use of water for separating shell and rope after being, after the busting of the clusters? Would that be something that's time saving or something that could happen?
It's certainly something that has been discussed because it is buoyant. And so what we find now is, even after we've had these clean shell piles, there's human error. And so when those shells are then spread back out into the estuary, we have what we call now chase boats that are literally going behind the big barges with nets, and they are scooping yellow rope as they see those fragments kind of come to the surface and float. However, we also have a lot of regulation in Washington state. And so in order to have water of that quantity being used to do something like separating the buoyant rope from the shell, you would have to have things like an MPDES permit, and water is very expensive if you're in the city and things like that. And so it doesn't become as cost effective or efficient when you start having to add permits and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I'll just add that we did, again, this whole idea of evolving and watching the industry change right in front of our eyes. When we first really said, what can we do here? There was another grower who said, we just have to somehow get the shell into even a little pool of water and just let it sit into that and bring it out through conveyor and let it float and skim it off. And that was one of the early ideas that we had. And as Miranda said, then what do you do with that sort of water? How do you dispose of that? So we wanted to try, and I appreciate the questions about recycling and how else can you use that. But anytime you deal with an issue like this, you have to be mindful of what are you passing on to somebody else to deal with, right? And if it's going to require a tremendous amount of input to deal with it, then is that really the right thing? So yeah, we thought about the water thing, and it's wonderful to hear growers are following up with the chase boats and so on. In that regard.
That's great. So we have another question. First, they want to thank you for the presentation, and they want to know if yellow ropes are conductive for some of the chemical additives. So are they releasing chemical additives as they decline? And we might
I'll be the first to say I don't know. I will tell you that when you find the yellow rope, oftentimes it could be dirty because it has sand or mud that is interwoven into it now. But for the most part, the yellow rope is completely intact, and so it holds up very well in the marine environment. So that leads me to believe that while there may be some corrosive activity that happens, it actually holds up pretty darn well, which is why we use it. But I'm not aware of any corrosive, leaching or any of that kind of activity. It's possible.
Okay. Great, thank you. So we have a couple more questions and we have a few more minutes. So let's take that opportunity. One question is, how can students, participate in helping to remove the yellow rope from some of these legacy piles? Is it something that might be able to happen as a stewardship project or a summer job? What could be a student's role in yellow rope containment? And what could a student do? Could they call their local shellfish farmer and say, I'd like to help with yellow rope? Or
I can start on that a little bit. I think Miranda could follow up with what her business is doing, company.
Mhm.
But I have actually, people have asked me how we can help and how we can help with the shell piles.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, it's not necessarily a safe work environment. Shells are very sharp and the
Yes.
piles are very tall and steep. So so companies are out there cleaning these shell piles manually by hand with rakes, but I don't think it's something that, they're going to be having students or people out there digging through anytime soon.
Mhm.
Brenda, do you want to follow up on?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think David's spot on. We have, this huge thing called liability. And so as much as we would love to get kids interfacing in that way, I would actually, and have in the past, pointed them towards, here's an area of beach that is known to collect yellow rope. And so might it be more fun or more advantageous to go and have a day at the beach? Who doesn't love a day at the beach, whether it's sunny or not? Unfortunately, in Washington, often not. And go out there to these areas that are known to have debris, and make their impact that way.
Okay. That's great. Margaret, anything to add to that?
The only thing I'd add is, while they're out looking for yellow rope on those beaches, to also please pick up other material and debris and properly dispose of that as well.
Mhm.
You'd be surprised with the amount of stuff that is out there.
Sure.
For me, a big help would be for students working with your local Sea Grant and participating in the beach cleanups, and then letting us know what you're finding and reporting things that are unusual. And so that way the industry knows what's going on and what's turning up on the beaches, so we can be more proactive.
Right,
Well,
and thank you, Terry. I saw you just reposted the marine debris hotline number, so please use that. And we do have shellfish growers in all of the West Coast states, and I noticed all of our attendees today are West Coast, so that number should work.
Great. So the 260 beaches works regardless of the state. Just put a 1 in front of it. Okay, that's great. 260. That's an interesting area.
Well, they have a fancy little thing that you tell them what kind of acronym you want on your phone number.
Oh.
It just so it happens. And I don't know where that is. It might be Iowa.
Well, I would like to say I really appreciate the three of you coming and speaking on this issue. I work a lot with students who spend time on beaches cleaning up marine debris. And while that is a great opportunity to engage in science, technology, engineering, and math as we sort and count and learn about how marine debris moves through a system, often we're thinking, well, how can we back up and get to where it starts and try tackling it from that point of view, the source, in addition to the cleanup part. And so knowing the story of this particular type of marine debris and how it might escape and all the things that have been discovered to try and tackle it from even escaping in the first place is very inspiring for students who are thinking of creating machines that, like a cluster buster or something of their own idea, that's an engineering skill. And then also a process skill, like how you do your business to help the prevention of the marine debris. I think it's really important, and it's great to have adult models for that, so that students can contribute and be inspired and maybe offer their own ideas locally that might be relevant. And so if they do collect marine debris that is of interest to an industry, you can reach out and have a conversation and get some good ideas going together.
Absolutely. It's very much thanks to our community friends and partners that this issue is being taken seriously and being addressed on a large scale. And I want to thank everyone for participating and being here today to learn more and hopefully be a part of the solution.
Great. Well, if it's all right, I'm going to just share one last slide She said.
And if you are watching this in the future, so it's not May 13th of 2021, thank you for joining us. And hopefully, you will see a difference in your beaches, for the yellow rope, but there's always an opportunity to find yellow rope and to seek it out and to use these resources in the future.
Excellent. Well, friends, that's all we have time for today. And before you go, we would love to have your feedback. And I thank you to our presenters. Thank you for joining us today when there's a lot of other things going on and we're all tired of Zoom. I appreciate you joining us. This concludes the Yellow Rope on the Beach webinar. Thank you again to our presenters and thank you for joining us. Have a great evening and we'll see you next time.